Hi, I'm Samantha. I'm a magazine editor by the day and I do commercial and wedding photography at night. I'm not big on micro four third cameras because I've primarily been using full frame bodies like the Canon EOS 5D, but I've heard a lot of hype about micro four third cameras because a lot of my friends use it as their backup cameras. They use it because they like how lightweight it is, how compact it is, and how it just bridges the gap between point and shoot cameras as well as full frame bodies. So today we're just gonna find out what's the big deal about the Panasonic Lumix GH6 and just to see whether it's as good a camera for photography as it is for videography. Alright, first impressions about this camera. It's got a very sturdy feel to it. It's got a nice rich grip at the side so that you can really shoot with just a single hand without worrying about the camera going out of place. It's also got a brand new video red button at the front so that you can easily shoot yourself for any video logs if that's what you're into. If you're used to the predecessors of this camera like the GH5, you might be very familiar with the different buttons and dials that's on the camera. Most of them are in pretty much the same places with very few exceptions to it. To add on, the camera's 1.84 million dot rear touchscreen ensures clear views whether you're shooting in the day or in the night. Borrowing a feature from the full-frame S1H, the screen can be tilted by about 45 degrees, so this allows space for the HDMI ports and even a microphone. So you've also got specifications like ProRes and ProRes HQ, allowing the camera's data rates to reach up to 1.9 GB per second. Plus there's also a high-speed CF Express slot together with a UHS-2 slot. Having one fast cut slot and one slow cut slot unfortunately means that you won't be able to back up ProRes on the SD card. The GH6 is basically a filmmaker's workhorse, allowing you to shoot at 5.7K up to 60 FPS, DCI 4K up to 120 DPS, and 1080p at 240 FPS. While they don't really call this a filmmaker's workhorse for nothing, this camera also has a cooling system that allows it to shoot for long hours with high resolution without the camera body getting too heated up as well. It's also got a special autofocus button at the back to help with detection of red eyes or if you're trying to focus on a subject at a very near distance as well. As a photographer, I found that this camera has a really cool function. It's called the 8-shot high resolution mode. So what it really does is that it combines and it aligns images from the different photos that you've taken to give you the very sharpest of the image. Even if you have a bit of handshake involved, even if you're not holding the camera as stable as you could, you're still going to get pretty sharp images at the end. Paired with Panasonic's motion correction processing, this camera allows you to capture up to 100 megapixel images even if there's a bit of motion shake. So in handheld mode, it's perfect for taking photos of moving subjects. So I tried shooting a couple's anniversary shoot with their very active puppy, and I found that no matter how much the puppy jumped around, hopped around, I still got pretty tech-sharp images of the dog and the couple. Photography-wise, the camera's noise reduction has also been updated as what they call the 2D noise reduction. So this works to suppress color noise and avoid any grain at a higher ISO. For instance, if you're shooting at night, you're shooting fireworks, or even just in a very low light situation. In the video mode, this is taken up a notch compared to the photography mode because it can even analyze and distinguish between what is real movement and what is temporal noise via what they call the 3D noise reduction. So you're going to get pretty sharp images whether you're shooting on the photo mode or if you're shooting videos on the GH6. So aside from the noise reduction modes, the GH6 also has this AI-trained subject recognition, which means that you have a choice of human subject, for instance your torso, your head, your face, your eye, or even human-animal recognition to help you make better focusing decisions. Alright, so when it came to the facial recognition, I found that when I brought my camera a little closer to a person's face, the eyes and the features became a lot sharper. So this worked pretty well for group shots as well as individual portraits as well. But when it came to low light conditions, for instance with just a very single source of light, the autofocus was still a little slow. So I wasn't sure how this would work out if I was trying to shoot even faster moving object like a car or even a cyclist, for instance. So while the camera offers 75 dps at a full 25 megapixel resolution for up to 200 JPEG or RAW images, this is quite limited to the autofocus S mode because it uses only the electronic shutter. Therefore, it's not really the sort of camera that you want to bring out to shoot fast-moving objects and subjects like wildlife photography or even fast spotting events. When I was trying to shoot fast-moving subjects like road cyclists, I found that the camera couldn't really lock onto the subject, and it was especially obvious for even faster-moving objects like a bird in the sky. Portraits and landscapes look set to be the camera's strong suit. You'll find that the lockable shooting mode dial has different exposure modes such as the program, the aperture priority, the shutter priority, as well as the marinure mode for more seasoned shooters. To save time on post-editing, you can also try using the 15 customizable photo styles as well as the camera's 8 filter effects. So these are essentially preset modes with different sharpness levels, contrast levels, saturation, and noise reduction levels. For me, I felt that the monochrome modes really fall short of expectations, whereas modes like Vivid and Portrait fit their purposes quite well. So there's also the Cine Light mode, which creates a bit of a desaturated feel, a bit like a vintage film. Then there's also the Retro mode that really pumps up the contrast to give you that old school Instagram filter look, if that's what you're into. So during my 2-week review period, I found that the camera produced really crisp images of fine quality, both in daytime and low light conditions. The photos were quite noise-free, all the way from ISO 100, with a bit of noise appearing only at about 3200 ISO levels. As we've mentioned, the camera is great for all sorts of subjects, but it's not so powerful when it comes to capturing fast-moving objects because of its slightly slow tracking. So what you should know is that the GH6 actually uses contrast detection-based AF system compared to what you might find in a compact camera or a point-and-shoot, and that's compared to the face detection autofocus system that a lot of modern DSLRs use today. Alright, we're talking about the Panasonic Leica 25mm 1.4. So the great thing about this lens is that, if you might know, it's the first micro four thirds lens to have the equivalent of the 50mm in a full frame camera. So what it means is that you get really nice portraits when you're shooting close-ups, you get nice depth of field when you're shooting portraits, whether it's a human or even a pet or even an animal. What my experience with it was that I got to shoot a model in low light conditions. We're shooting in an arcade with a lot of neon lights in the background, and still the camera lens was able to nicely differentiate between the background as well as the portrait. You get the nice bouquet of the neon lights in the background of the arcade, as well as her features and her hair, everything nicely tagged sharp. So I would say this is a great camera for aspiring portrait photographers, a good camera to have in your arsenal of lenses if you're a wedding photographer, as well as a great camera, a great lens to use even on a daily basis. So another thing about this lens is that it's got the nano surface coating. So what this really does for the lens is that it reduces any ghosting at the edges of the lens as well. So when you get your images back, it's gonna be pretty sharp all the way to the edges as well, with very little vignetting. For the 1260, it's got everything you need for wide angle photography all the way to short tele lens photography as well. If you're into taking a hike in the park and you just want to try shooting out some of the animals that you see along the way, this is a great camera to use. The autofocus is super fast, even at its max zoom focal length and even at its most narrow focal length as well. So I would recommend using manual focus if you're a more experienced photographer. If not, the autofocus works just as well. So the lens is very durable. It's meant for all weather conditions, it's dust proof, it's splash proof, so you can probably bring it out to all sorts of adventures that you have. So this lens is designed in collaboration with Leica. So what's cool about it is that it's also got the power optical image stabilization system. So this helps to reduce any appearance of camera shake for sharper handheld shooting, especially if you're shooting with just a single hand. Because it uses the linear autofocus motor, its autofocus is really silent, you can barely hear anything, and it's also very precise for both stills and videos. So my personal experience with the 12-60 lens was a very pleasant one. So I took it with me to the Sungai Buloh Wetland Reserve to shoot whatever I could see there. I saw some birds, I saw some wildlife, and this camera made it really easy for me to capture these moments from a long distance. So the great thing about this camera is that autofocusing was very fast, and even when the sunlight was a little harsh, I did get pretty sharp images that I could very easily post-edit later on. If battery life matters a lot to you, or if you tend to shoot for long hours, then perhaps this camera doesn't perform that well in that aspect. On an SD card, it can probably shoot about 380 stills, which is pretty little if you're thinking of shooting an 8-hour wedding or even going outdoors for wildlife photography. Just stalking and waiting for the animal to appear is not gonna work that well for that. For day-to-day shooting, I would say the GH6 performs pretty well. It's good enough if you're just looking to take photos of your environment. If you're looking to take nice portraits of your family and friends, this is a wonderful camera to have. Alright, aside from the video capabilities, it's a good camera for you to use in pretty much any sort of situation if battery life is not your main concern. Well, I wouldn't say this is your entry-level camera. With its body costing $2,199, you might be better off getting a full-frame body if professional photography is your forte. But if you're someone who's more into casual photography, or if videography is your main priority, then the GH6 could be the one for you. So you've seen the photos, you've seen the video footages taken by the GH6. And if you're still wondering if you should invest in this camera, here's my verdict. So throughout the 1 month or so of testing out this camera, I found that the photos were really crisp and clear, especially when it came to portraits and landscapes. I shot a pre-wedding shoot with it and the couples loved it. I find that when it paired with prime lenses, a lot of the facial features were really sharp and the bokeh was beautiful as well. And it's great for single-handed shooting if you're worried are the photos going to come up blur or anything like that. No, it will not. The image stabilization system is quite solid, and shooting with a single hand is perfectly fine as well. But if you're someone who's into shooting more action-packed shots like maybe sporting events or even wildlife photography, I wouldn't say this is the best camera for it. It tends to be a little slower when it comes to the tracking of faster moving objects and subjects. So if you're looking to shoot more still images and still subjects, then I think it will do just well. If you're someone who's into vlogging more so than photography, then yes, this is the camera for you. If you're someone who's more into shooting photography and you want a more long-term investment, I would say go for a full-frame camera. Alright, thanks for watching Tech 360. I will see you guys around. Bye!